wasn't planning on doing another video today, but there is this document that keeps showing up in my feed. And so I read it last night. And I took some notes. And I'm going to read it to you. It was evidently released as a CIA document on all kinds of metaphysical information. And it was evidently approved for release according to the bar at the top in 2003. But for some reason, I've had like 3 friends post it this week. And I don't know why it's all of a sudden in the news now. But either way, the information is what matters, and it's pretty cool. So let's cut to reading this document, and I will link the full document in the comments. It's a 29-page document. The print's really small, so it's more like 50 pages. I'm not going to cover the whole thing, but I am going to go through a significant portion of it. Hopefully this doesn't take too long, and I'm able to read it okay. Have a great day. Hello. So this document, as you can see, was approved for release up at the top on September 10th, 2003. And it's titled The Gateway Experience, Brain Hemisphere Synchronization in Perspective. Now, I'm going to read the introduction so that we know what's going on here. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, the gateway experience, involving brain hemisphere synchronization, or hemisync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which underlay operation of related methods, such as hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe what gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that share some common aspects with the gateway experience, but which are nevertheless different. In this way, we can develop a frame of reference at the outset, which will provide useful concepts to explain and understand gateway by comparison as we proceed. Now, I'll try to put some of this in layman's terms. It's, I think a lot of the times they use really advanced vocabulary to confuse people. Hypnosis. According to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Itzhak Bentov, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers, and lower cerebral, emotional portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain following successful disengagement of the stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allowing passage to the non-critical, hold on. Sorry. Where are we at? Okay. Excuse me. Hi, sweetie. I'm sorry, I've lost my spot to the non-critical. Okay, non-critical, holistic, non-verbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom or through reduction to a soporific semi-sleep state, external stimuli, to include hypnotic suggestions, are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere, where they are accepted and acted upon directly. Interestingly enough, television hypnotizes us. The result may involve an emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, sensory motor responses requiring involvement of the cortex, and so on. Both the sensory and the points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to points in the body. See Exhibit 1, next page. Stimulation of the corresponding area on the cortex causes intermediate response in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, induction of the suggestion that the left leg is numb if it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged and is referred to the appropriate area of the sensory cortex will result in an electrical reaction being generated that will induce the feeling of numbness. Similarly, the suggestion that the person is experiencing a general feeling of happiness and well-being would be referred to the appropriate pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral portion or in the context of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as one that informs the hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration or powers of memory would be responded to in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity normally held in reserve as a result of left hemisphere selection and control processes. This aspect will become significant in the context of the gateway process when attention is given to examining the way that hypnosis may be used to accelerate progress in the early stages of the gateway experience. So essentially what I take from this is hypnosis somehow, okay, I guess the left brain controls the whole brain, and somehow hypnosis puts that left brain to sleep so that the right brain, it bypasses that left brain. Okay. Maybe I'm interpreting that wrong, but transcendental meditation. On the other hand, transcendental meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense and protracted single-minded concentration on the process of drawing energy up the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. As a result, according to Bentov, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus. I really, starting from the toes and on up. The Bentov biomedical model, as described in a book by Lee Sanella, MD, entitled Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence, states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of the altered rhythm of heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation and which set up sympathetic vibrations in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain. In addition, according to Bentov, the states of bliss described by those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed the full loop along the hemisphere may be explained as self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain caused by the circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. Bentov also notes that most of the described symptoms start on the left side of the body, means that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere. Although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or some is required to bring up the Kundalini, Bentov states that exposure to mechanical or acoustical vibrations in the range of 4 to 7 hertz cycles per second for protracted periods may achieve the same effect. Bentov cites as an example repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produce that range of vibrations or being exposed for long periods of time to these frequencies caused, for instance, by an air conditioning duct. He also notes that the cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous physio-kundalini sequence in susceptible people who have particularly sensitive nervous system. So, they're acknowledging, that Kundalini is a legit thing and that they know how to artificially stimulate it. Now, let's see, biofeedback. Okay, I'm not sure about the bio. I'm not going to read all that. Okay, so then I was going to talk about number 6 here. And this is a lady, Melissa Yeager, uses a metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of hemisync in the gateway process. She points out that hemisync is a type of technology that they're using to get these people in these states, or a type of programming, is what I gathered. She points out that the human mind, in its natural state, may be likened to an ordinary lamp which expands energy in the form of both heat and light, but in a chaotic, incoherent way, which diffuses its energy over a wide area rather than a limited depth. On the other hand, the human mind, under the discipline of hemisync, acts after the fashion of a laser beam, which produces a disciplined stream of light. The stream of energy is projected with total coherence of both frequency and amplitude, such that the surface area of a laser beam contains billions of times the concentrated energy found in a similar surface area on the sun. Gateway assumes that once the frequency and amplitude of the human brain are rendered coherent, it is possible to begin accelerating both, so that the human mind is soon resonating at even higher or at ever higher vibrational levels. The mind can then bring itself into synchronization with more sophisticated and rarefied energy levels in the universe. The mind, when operating at these increasingly rarefied levels, is assumed to be capable of processing the information, thus receiving through the same fundamental matrix by which it makes sense of ordinary physical sensory input to achieve meaning in a cognitive context. Such meaning is usually perceived visually in the form of symbols, but may also be perceived as astonishing flashes of holistic intuition, or even in the form... Oh, and this one was weird. It cut... Like that was it. In this document, sometimes the actual thing cuts off. Like it skips. Like there's another place that happens where the page just isn't there. Okay, so we didn't get to finish the rest of that. But what she was saying was, that once the mind gets to a certain synchronization, you can end up on higher states of consciousness. And I feel that that's absolutely true. I've had visions to that extent. I feel that the eyeball is somehow a laser, and that has something to do with it. The eyeball is somehow really significant. But beyond that, and maybe it's, the eyeball takes in so much information, and then it appears like chaos in the brain. I don't know. It's kind of what he's talking about. But when one gets on a higher frequency, the brain acts as a transceiver, okay? Like, think of ourselves as an antenna, and like consciousness produces, like there are levels of awareness, like a radio station, like radio stations. And depending on what frequency you're on is what radio stations you can tune into. So like if you're on a higher vibration or higher frequency, you can reach higher information, okay? And I know from years of personal experience and, like I said, lots of visions, that this is true. Okay. So anyways, okay, now, consciousness and energy. I don't know why this is, okay. Before our explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way in which that consciousness operates to deduce the meaning from the stimuli which it receives. To do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have our physical existence, in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with which our consciousness must work. The first point which needs to be made is that the two terms, matter and energy, tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world that we know it. Indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean a force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons, which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom, and the nucleus itself, are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter, in the strict construction of the term, simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids surrounded by other oscillating energy grids which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. In his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Itzhak Bentov gives the following figures. The energy grid, which composes the nucleus of the atom, vibrates at approximately 10 to the 22nd power hertz, which means 10 followed by 22 zeros. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at the rate of 10 to the 15th power hertz. An entire molecule composed of a number of atoms bound together in a single energy field vibrates at the range of 10 to the 9th hertz. A live human cell vibrates at approximately 10 to the 3rd hertz. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all, is like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in two opposite states, motion versus rest, in a manner described in the following paragraph. Okay, so now we get into holograms. Now, holograms is something that I have a hard time visualizing, and I still have a hard time visualizing it after reading this, but maybe some of you will comprehend what this is saying. And about consciousness and the energy, I mean, it is true that physical matter does not exist. And it has to, I mean, you know, the higher speeds, it seems like that the lower speed that you go, if you go at a lower speed, you would get closer to rest and you might get out of this matrix. I don't know. Okay. I just read all this. I've still got to process all of it. But rereading it here to you out loud will help me process it. So I appreciate you bearing with me. Okay. Holograms. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. The concept of the hologram can be most easily understood by using an example cited by Bentov, in which he asks the reader to visualize a bowl full of water into which 3 pebbles are dropped. As the ripples created by the simultaneous entry of the 3 pebbles radiate outward towards the rim of the bowl, Bentov further asks the reader to visualize that the surface of the water is suddenly flash frozen so that the ripple pattern is preserved instantly. Okay. The ice is removed, leaving the 3 pebbles still laying at the bottom of the bowl. Then the ice is exposed to a powerful coherent source of light, such as a laser. The result will be a 3-dimensional model or representation of the position of the 3 pebbles suspended in midair. Okay. Holograms are capable of encoding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of swamp water and view it under magnification to see small organisms not visible to the naked eye when the glass of water itself is examined. The whole concept of holography, despite its scientific implications, has only been known to the physicists since the underlying mathematical principles were worked out by Denis Gabor in 1947. He later won a Nobel Prize for his work. Laboratory demonstration of Gabor's work only occurred years later following the invention of the laser. As biologist Lyle Watson explains, the purest kind of light available to us is that produced by a laser, which sends out a beam in which all the waves are of one frequency, like those made by an ideal pebble in a perfect pond. When 2 laser beams touch, they produce an interference pattern of light and dark ripples that can be recorded on a photographic plate. And if one of the beams, instead of coming directly from the laser, is reflected first off an object, such as a human face, the resulting pattern will be very complex indeed, but it can still be recorded. The record will be a hologram of the face. Now, this reminds me of an eye. The eye reminds me of a laser, a scalar laser. I don't know. And then down here in the yellow, another feature of a hologram is its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a tiny space. The pattern of the holographic photograph, there's no photograph, is stored everywhere on the plate. Okay. The consciousness matrix. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest and some in motion. It is, in and of itself, one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. So that's essentially what I said, that the brain is a transceiver and tunes into consciousness. With respect to states of expanded or altered consciousness, such as gateway uses, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Changes in frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field, which comprises the human mind, determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Then, to make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with that part of its own hologram which constitutes memory. By registering differences in geometric form and in energy frequency, the consciousness perceives, see next page, I don't know. There's so many pages missing in this, it's really aggravating. Contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. Awesome, yes, that's exactly what I feel. Okay. Now, we're going to skip over here to number 22. I mean, this is a good document, and it's worth reading the rest, and I will link it. And in this last one where it was talking about electrostatic fields, you know, the reason that the pendulum supposedly works is that when you ask the question, the impulse immediately comes through the ether. It's an electromagnetic reaction. And it goes through your body, and that's what makes the pendulum move. And it's the process, it's that the process happens so fast. That's how it works, supposedly. It picks up out of the ether by an electromagnetic impulse. Okay, special status, out-of-body experience. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time-space and interface with other energy systems and other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measure from physical body before such interface is attempted. Once an individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of the time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of clicking out part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimensions with which he wishes to communicate. In other words, since he is starting from a point much higher up, to use an analogy from the time-space context, that part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have that much more time to interact in dimensions beyond time-space because less time is required to traverse the intervening layers. Moreover, once the individual is able to project his consciousness beyond time-space, that consciousness would logically tend to entrain its frequency output with the new energy environment to which it is exposed, therein greatly enhancing the extent to which the individual's altered consciousness may be further modified to achieve a much heightened point of focus and a much refined oscillating pattern. As a result, a self-reinforcing process should ensue whereby the farther consciousness in the out-of-body state can be projected beyond the time-space dimension, the more its level of energy output would be enhanced, thus promoting the potential for still further travel. The tentative conclusion to be drawn is that the out-of-body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interfacing with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the out-of-body experience as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from a physical base, the former would appear to promise much faster and more impressive successes than does the latter. Well, that's all fine and dandy. And when I was little, I could astral project, and I asked my parents about it, and they didn't know what I was talking about, and it scared me, and I didn't know, so I didn't do it anymore. But the astral realm, which is what it's called, it is full of negative energies. It's been hijacked. So I don't even have a good feeling about astral projection. Now, before it was hijacked, yeah, probably. But unless you're a fearless individual ready to stand up to any kind of attachment, and then you're going to bring negative energies back with you. It's just, yeah, they've hijacked it. Whoever the evil is that runs this world. Okay. Well, now this one's not, I cut this one. I hope I can still read this. Okay. From Big Bang to torus. Working from the widely accepted Big Bang theory, Bentov presents a conceptual model to depict the process of time-space evolution, the relative position of the universal hologram. That hologram is often called a torus because it's thought to have an overall shape of an immense self-contained spiral. Basing his thesis on recent studies concerning the distribution of quasars and operating on the premise that in the universe, smaller processes tend to be mirror images of larger ones, i.e., the pattern of electrons around the nucleus of an atom mirrors the way planets orbit their suns and so on. Bentov postulates the following scenario. Taking his cue from the observed capability of quasars to eject enormously concentrated beams of matter from their interiors in a controlled, non-concentric version of the Big Bang, he envisages a similar process occurring in the generation of the universe. Noting that those galaxies located to the north of our own galaxy are moving away faster than those located to the south, and that those to the east and west are demonstrably more distant. Bentov regards this as substantive evidence that the jet of matter, which expanded into our universe, has turned back upon itself, eventually forming an ovoid or egg shape. He sees matter in our universe entering the ovoid pattern following an ejection from a nucleus composed of extremely compressed energy through a white hole. At the end of its trip to the far end of the ovoid, he sees it departing via a black hole. It's interesting. In such a model, time is observed to be a measure of the change which occurs as energy evolves into new, more complex forms as it progresses along this distance from the white hole side of the nucleus around the shell of this cosmic egg until it enters the black hole. Interesting use of terminology. In other words, as energy expelled from infinity and confined within limits by the conscious of the absolute, achieves form and motion following ejection from the white hole at the top of the egg, time begins as a measure of the cadence of this evolutionary movement as reality goes around the shell of the egg on its journey to the black hole at the far end. That's really interesting that we're talking about an egg shape. Now, the Big Bang's nonsense. Nothing in this world behaves. It just goes completely against the law of entropy. But I find it very interesting here that he says that he sees it departing via a black hole. Because actually, and he sees it and then he sees it entering. Does he say he sees it entering through a white hole? Ejection from the white hole at the top of the egg, and time begins. See, the top of the egg, if you've seen some of my other videos, is where there's a spider machine that traumatizes consciousness, and then it puts it back in. What he's saying, it being ejected at the black hole at the far end, is probably actually it being sucked in here. I don't know. I mean, well, obviously, this is all speculation, but just interesting use of the terminology of egg. Now, this diagram here is his picture of it, but I have seen Og Tellez draw something very similar. The simple torus down here in the figure C is interesting too. I do feel the matrix is a toroidal field, electromagnetic torus field. In some of my last video on More Reasons the Globe is BS, I talk about this. Okay. Quality of consciousness. We noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy pattern that represents human consciousness so that it may move either freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purposes of information acquisition or into other dimensions outside of time-space, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. Now, I don't know that they're outside of time and space. I think they're just going to other dimensions. All of these matrices and all of these dimensions are within the time-space, the artificial reality. It is outside of that. And I don't feel too many people are going outside of the matrix in their astral travel. Outside of the matrix, we are whole. It's a whole space. We are everything and everywhere all at one time. And it actually, they talk something about the way consciousness is when you're in the whole space. It's interesting, but I don't know. I feel all these dimensions, when they say dimensions, we're still talking inside the reality, the artificial reality. Okay. Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion within a given set of parameters so that a specific reality will result. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute. But in the case of the latter, it is a function of energy and its associated quality of consciousness in infinity, omniscience, and omnipotence in perceptual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses to maintain its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. It accounts for the organization of the energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate from and superior to it. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space, it, like the absolute, has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end because it is bound within time-space, but the fundamental quantum of energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When reality ends, its constituent energy simply returns to infinity in the absolute. Consciousness in perspective. Having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligences in other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all the memories it has accumulated through experience in reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained in reality. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. What it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that can be done only by energy and motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. I think it's interesting that they call will choice right here. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences the out-of-body state, he is, in fact, projecting that eternal spark of consciousness and memory, which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside the time-space world in which his physical component currently enjoys. Okay, now here's something I just wanted to focus on. It was just interesting. D, energy bar tool. Magic wands and enchanted scepters have been part of the folklore and occult practices of many cultures. The scepter staffs and maces carried by monarchs and high priests alike occur with such frequency in the history of bygone eras as to suggest that at the very least, these items are aspects of some type of archetypal symbol which the human mind seems to appreciate, perhaps quite subliminally. In any case, the energy bar tool technique involves envisaging a small, intensely pulsating dot of light, which the participant charges in his imagination with enormous energy until it is virtually pulsating. The participant then extrudes the dot into the shape of a sparkling, vibrating cylinder of energy for which he uses to channel force from the universe to selected parts of his body for purposes of healing and revitalization. Oh man, that actually sounds like that might work. I can envision that right now. Dang, I'm going to do that. Remote viewing. In addition, the energy bar tool is used as a portal for initiating a follow-on technique called remote viewing. In this context, the participant turns his bar of energy into a whirling vortex through which he sends his imagination in search of new and illuminating insights. The apparent purpose of the symbolism involved in the vortex seems to be to cue the subconscious and convey to it instructions as to what the participant wishes to do, but in terms of nonverbal symbols which the right hemisphere of the mind is capable of understanding. I'm not going to read the other part. Okay, the out-of-body movement. I'm almost done with this, by the way. This remarkable phenomenon has been saved for discussion in detail until last because of the interest which it occasions and special circumstances involved in its attainment. Monroe Institute stresses that the Gateway program was not established solely for the purpose of enabling participants to obtain the out-of-body state, nor does the program guarantee that most participants will succeed in doing it during the course of the training at the Institute. Only one tape out of the many which make up the Gateway experience is devoted to the techniques involved in the out-of-body movement. Basically, these techniques are merely designed to make it easier for the individual to achieve the out-of-body state when his brainwave pattern and personal energy levels have reached a point that he is in apparent harmony with his surrounding electromagnetic environment, such that he feels that he has reached the threshold where separation is a possibility. To facilitate achieving the out-of-body state, Bob Monroe, the founder of the Monroe Institute, is quoted in a recent magazine article as saying that, in order to assist the participant, the particular hemisync tape concerned with that technique employs beta signals of around 2,877.3 CPS, cycles per second. Since 30 to 40 cycles per second is considered to be the normal range of beta brainwave signals, those associated with the wakeful state, it is apparent that the Monroe Institute is convinced that the same heightened state of brainwave frequency output, which promotes altered states of consciousness, is also an important consideration in assisting in achievement of out-of-body states. The actual techniques employed for separating from the body involve such simple maneuvers as rolling out, lifting out after the fashion of a telephone pole, wherein the individual separates in a rigid head-first manner, such that he finds himself standing at attention at the foot of his physical body and sliding out through either end of his body. Okay, the role of REM sleep. It is interesting to note that Bob Monroe informed the Gateway class that finished May 7th, 1983, that an ex-trainer of his operating in Charlottesville, Virginia, found that he could guarantee out-of-body movements by bringing participants down into a rapid eye movement state of sleep and then using the hemi-sync tape technique. This may well be a function of the fact that most, if not all, people reputedly go into an out-of-body state during REM sleep. REM sleep is the deepest possible level of ordinary sleep and involves complete disengagement of the body's motor cortex functions from the neck down and nearly complete suppression of consciousness in the left brain hemisphere. The effect of this is to put the body in a state of complete stillness so far as the skeletal muscle structure is concerned, thereby further promoting the state of deep rest needed to eliminate the bifurcation echo. In addition, it leaves the right hemisphere of the brain free to respond to the instructions and suggestions contained in the gateway tape. However, use of the hemi-sync tapes at this point may be less a factor in actually achieving the out-of-body state than it is a matter of focusing the brain enough so that a residual memory of having naturally achieved an out-of-body state is carried into the waking state. Indeed, it may even be postulated that some dreams associated with deep levels of sleep are in fact functions of the same kind of altered consciousness involved in interaction with the universe that plays a role in all of the focused 12, 15, and 21 states described above. The difference in those states and the condition of the mind in REM sleep seems to be that the left hemisphere is almost totally disengaged in the latter experience, such that memory of what was achieved in the altered states of consciousness cannot usually be retrieved by conscious desire because the left hemisphere has no knowledge of its existence or its location in the right hemisphere. Admittedly, some people can be trained to remember their REM state dreams through intense conditioning in the waking state, but even that may be more a function of establishing pathways in the right hemisphere, which the left hemisphere can access following re-entry into the wakeful state, than it is an indication of any specific left hemisphere conscious involvement in the process during REM sleep. In any event, the three apparent conditions required for voluntarily inducing an out-of-body state in most individuals seems to be: 1, achievement of a state of profound quiet in the body, such that the bifurcation echo fades in resonance at approximately 7 Hz is established, synchronization of the two brain hemisphere wave patterns, and 3, subsequent stimulation of the right hemisphere of the mind to attain a state of heightened alertness, which of course interferes with brain hemisphere synchronization, but not until a sufficient level of enhanced frequency range has first been established to help achieve the out-of-body state. Like I said, I've done the out-of-body thing, but I was a child. It happened spontaneously and naturally. I used to get this really weird feeling in my tongue, like everything would like vibrate, and then you'd start like flying out of your body. It was crazy. Okay. I'm not going to read any more of this. You know, we talk about belief systems. Okay, now the conclusion. So there's a sound rational basis in terms of physical science parameters for considering gateway to be plausible in terms of its essential subjectives. Intuitional insights of not only personal but of a practical and professional nature would seem to be within bounds of reasonable expectations. Okay, so, you know, basically it just goes on how the gateway, I mean, like they should use this to help people achieve states of consciousness. Obviously, I think they're trying to get information from these higher states of consciousness. Some of it, benevolent, some of it probably malevolent. Many scientists are just genuinely interested, but then others, they have agendas. So it's an interesting paper. I will link it. Like I said, I thought of some questions I'm going to add for my next session. Sorry this was so long. It was a lot of reading. I hope you appreciate it. And if you like this video or like my channel, please share, subscribe. I'd like to interact with the audience, and I would need to get to 1,000 subs to do